Hello and welcome to One Week, One Year, a podcast where we watch and discuss a year of film history every episode, starting from 1895, the dawn of cinema, completely sequentially, and we've made it all the way up to 1925 this year. I'm one of your hosts, Chris Ellie. I'm a film projectionist, and joining me as always is...
I'm Glenn Covell, a filmmaker.
And,
And we are podcasters.
oh, gotta do that every time.
We do now, yeah.
uh, Just a heads up to everybody who's watching this on YouTube. If you prefer to listen, you can go on your podcast app of choice and search us on up, and then you can find us there if you want to just listen to the audio. And if you're listening on out in podcast land, at least for the time being, we're going to be running parts of the movies on like while we're talking about them, so you can sort of watch along and get a feel for the movie while while you're listening. And let me throw this at the beginning too. Follow us on Instagram and stuff. Watch us on Instagram.
Sure.
Look at us on a social media. Now that we have all that out of the way, Glenn, how you doing?
A little tired. We're recording this one pretty early in the morning, which is unusual for both of us, I think.
We're not early morning people.
No. I have some, I guess, vaguely podcast-related news, which we had both talked about sort of which silent movies we thought would be good to put on in the background at a party. And I tried actually doing that this past week. My roommate had a birthday party, and I asked first, but I put on some silent movies in the background, just playing, in the living room, and it seemed like a good thing. I don't know, people seemed to like
smash.
I don't know, because it was the sort of thing where it's like no one was like sitting and watching all of them, but it was like I could tell when it was like drawing people's attention, which is kind of cool to see.
What were some highlights on that playlist?
I mean, the climax of Safety Last, like multiple people were just watching that because it was so insane and crazy. Just people were just like, I gotta see what's gonna happen.
Did you put on all of Safety Last, or did you edit something together?
No, it was just all of Safety Last played. I mean, it's a pretty short movie, but
I see.
And it's fairly, I think, visually interesting one, even outside of that like big climax. But yeah, maybe we should make that podcast make that playlist, I should say, part of the podcast playlists on YouTube, because
the most visually interesting and gripping silent films.
Not just visually interesting and gripping, but like good vibes too. I feel like helps.
Yeah,
Yeah. I don't know. There were certain criteria. I was like, no, it has to fit within these parameters, I think.
Yeah, a lot of. I mean, for good vibes, you want to put a lot of the devil stuff, a lot of the Méliès and spooky things. Give me something spooky,
Exactly.
I'm in the middle of moving, which is
always a fun time.
It's horrible.
Yeah,
it's horrible.
It's one of my least favorite things to do in life that I have experienced.
Yes, and then also the moment that my lease ends in 4 days is also right in the middle of a film festival that we're doing. So that's just even more pressure on top of all that.
Yeah. Oh boy.
I hate it. But we're here to talk about old movies.
Indeed.
But before we do that, we always like to orient ourselves into the year, try and give us a little context for what's going on.
Indeed.
So Glenn, why don't you bring us into 1925 with your news?
The news of the year, 1925. Balto and Togo, two fearless sled dogs, helped to successfully deliver life-saving diphtheria medication in the frozen wilderness of Alaska. F. Scott Fitzgerald publishes The Great Gatsby. Art Deco is coined at the International Exhibition of Modern Decorative and Industrial Arts in Paris. British explorer Percy Fawcett disappears into the wild jungles of the Amazon in search of a lost city, never to be seen again. John T. Scopes is found guilty of teaching evolution in Tennessee. Mount Rushmore National Memorial is dedicated in South Dakota. Ace of Spies, Sidney Riley, is executed by Soviet agents.
All right. Thanks, Glenn.
Eventful year.
Yeah.
A lot of news fit to read in that voice, I feel like.
That is true. Yes, we're getting really
we got
into this,
explorers disappearing in the jungle. We got aces of spies.
I think as a podcast we've generally come down against D.W. Griffith, and for similar reasons, and also the reason that it's boring and bad. I think we should stake our official stance of anti-Mount Rushmore.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, Mount Rushmore, big dumb thing that shouldn't exist. And I've been there.
I can vouch for that.
Yeah. I mean, whatever. It's like, as like a sculpture, fine, whatever. Faces on a mountain. But yeah, it is like, for other reasons, it absolutely should not exist.
Alfred Hitchcock should have just destroyed it when he...
Yeah, he should have blown it up. I think that probably would have made things worse, but yeah.
If he blew up Mount Rushmore, we would have ourselves like 4 different Planet of the Apes situations.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get on to our feature presentation.
Indeed.
And now we're pleased to bring you our feature presentation.
Much like last episode, we are not doing any shorts this week.
No, because we're tired. And...
Yeah. Well, there's a lot going on, especially with features. I feel like there are less kind of notable shorts these past 2 years, and yeah, our time is limited. So,
unfortunately,
deal with it.
Yeah. Make us a Patreon and then give us money if you want us to do shorts again. We will, but just not now. Let's come on in with, I don't know, what do you want?
Start with something spooky.
First? Ooh, the Phantom of the Opera.
Indeed.
I was not that familiar with Phantom of the Opera.
Just as a story in general.
I think I knew the broad strokes, but I've never seen or read any kind of version of it specifically, except for Phantom of the Paradise, which is a great movie. Great movie.
I need to see Phantom of the Paradise.
Oh, it's so good.
It's true. I think this is the first time I've I'd never watched the musical. I'd never read the book. I'd never seen any of the movies, so this was the first time I properly had seen any Phantom of the Opera thing.
You being in New York City, you only have a little bit of time left to watch the musical.
I don't think I'm going to. Full disclosure, I don't think I'm going to go.
So this was starring Lon Chaney, who we previously saw in He Who Gets Slapped.
Indeed.
And
probably his most famous movie, I would argue.
I think so.
Yeah.
This is another one where he's doing his crazy makeup, crazy monster, quote unquote, makeup.
Yeah.
And we watched the more prevalent version of this movie is a 1929 re-release of it, which is it loses about half an hour out of the runtime. But we watched the original blurry 1925 16 millimeter version.
Well, because I think the 1929 one, I haven't seen it, but I think they reshot a lot of it, and so that's why it's better quality, is because it's from a 35 millimeter print. Because they reshot it for sound.
I mean, certainly this would have been shot on 35 millimeter, right? It's just the only 16 millimeter elements exist.
Yeah, exactly. I think 16 millimeter had only just been invented as a film stock at this point. So
I think a lot of people know the Phantom of the Opera story, but I don't know how much detail we need to go into. But on the other hand, I had never, I wasn't that familiar, I guess.
I was kind of surprised at how I feel like I had this like vague idea in my head of like, I guess that's what Phantom of the Opera is, and then the movie was like exactly that. Um, like I feel like in my head I was like, I don't know, there's like an opera ghost or something, and then right off the bat, like in the intertitles, they're like, we have an opera ghost.
Right, yeah, it's everybody's a little here's all of these rumors of a phantom that's haunting the opera house. Uh they they have their changing rooms and all of that stuff are like deep inside of the catacombs of the opera house, which it's an opera house with catacombs.
Yeah, I mean, hey, Paris got a lot of catacombs.
I thought something notable was also, before we get fully started, that it says filmed entirely in Universal City, California.
Yeah.
So it's Universal is a real deal enough that they've got their own city now.
Well, also, I was reading about the set for this movie that they built of the Paris Opera House, like the main sort of opera house set, was left standing until like 2014 or something like that.
Jeez.
Like it was just a standing set on the Universal lot for decades. Which is pretty wild, and it was only fairly recently like dismantled. I think it's like it still exists in pieces somewhere. But yeah, they went hard on the sets in this movie.
Yeah, for sure. I can see why they were proud of the fact that it was all filmed in California, like on set. Because some of these exterior shots have the lavishness of an Eric von Stroheim outdoor set.
Yeah, I don't know if they went quite as hard as that. In terms of like needlessly giant sets.
Needlessly wasteful sets.
I did notice how there's towards the end there's like a chase scene and they run past Notre Dame Cathedral, and it's the same set from Hunchback of Notre Dame, the earlier Lon Chaney movie, because they built a set for that also. So it's like, hey, we still got this one. This is also set in Paris. We got to get more use out of this.
This also had me thinking about a little bit how movies of the silent era could be kind of casually more international than it was able to be for sound films, because you didn't have to get over this, thing of people speaking a different language. So I mean, we've definitely seen this before, but I think that it's rare for American movies these days to be set entirely and starring entirely characters that are from another country. I mean, people will do Phantom of the Opera adaptations, but when you can just have them speak in English in the intertitles, it helps a lot.
I think now they do the thing that everyone does in American films, where something is set entirely in France and every character is French, and they all talk like this, don't they? They're all English.
It's just foreign enough to trick our American
I know.
ears.
It's just like the Europe, I guess. Whatever. Should we talk about the plot?
Yeah, give me a little plot.
So yeah, Lon Chaney plays the titular Phantom of the opera house. The movie opens with the opera house being sold, and the like previous owners, like after the sale goes through, like, oh yeah, by the way, there's a ghost. You're gonna get ghosts. And yeah, we've seen all these kind of rumors and people around the opera house like talking about the Phantom. Turns out the Phantom is a guy who just kind of lives in the bowels of the opera house and has kind of a crush on one of the opera understudies named Christine, and threatens chaos and mayhem if she doesn't sing in the opera.
Yeah, he's always kind of sticking his hand out of... He's so familiar with all of the catacombs and nooks and crannies of this opera house that he can kind of traverse in the in between the walls and stick his hand out of mysterious places and place notes on people's desk to
Yeah.
say, make my girlfriend the main singer,
Yeah.
or I'll do something bad.
Yeah, there's a lot of like secret doors and stuff going on, which I
Yeah.
wonder if is just a real thing in Paris opera houses.
It made me think of Fantomas a lot.
Yeah.
And how it's just like, yeah, lots of like trap doors and like hidden chambers to, you know, imprison and torture people in, and all this kind of thing.
You love to see it. And yeah, all of the sets in this are really cool. The people who run the opera house kind of call the Phantom's bluff, and so then the Phantom drops a chandelier on the audience.
The only reason I know about the whole chandelier thing is because I've seen the Phantom of the Opera episode of Comedy Bang Bang, where Paul F. Tompkins as Andrew Lloyd Webber is talking about their chandelier budget for their for their production of the Phantom of the Bang Bang set.
You knew there was going to be a lot of chandelier stuff in this movie,
or at least like an expensive prop.
Yeah,
an expensive prop chandelier being ruined at every show.
So the Phantom kind of kidnaps Christine out of her dressing room, and takes her into the bowels, or into the catacombs, to his man cave beneath the opera house. And it is, he sleeps in a coffin. He's a real. He's kind of a.
He's a real character. He says when he sleeps in the coffin, that it keeps him mindful of that other dreamless sleep that lasts forever.
Yeah.
Very, very, very dark and brooding and mysterious, and handsome. Except,
I feel like
he's got a mask on the whole time.
Yeah, he's wearing this mask, and he's like, "Hey, Christine, big fan.
Don't touch the mask.
Come live in my man cave. The one thing you don't do is don't touch my mask." And so then, he's playing his organ. And she's like, "Oh, I really want to take that mask off." She's just itching to take that mask off.
She looks kind of like she's playing a big old prank on him,
Yeah. She's
like,
sort of very,
fun.
very playfully sort of like, and then probably the most like famous shot in this whole movie is then she reaches sort of over his head and takes his mask off, and we reveal the horrifying visage of the Phantom, of Eric the Phantom. I do like how his name is just Eric.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's in the original story.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a K at least. That's a little
true.
It's a little
jazzing it up a little
interesting.
bit. Yeah.
Speaking of that K, and this is like really nitty gritty, but I think this and another movie in the title cards, all of the K's had descenders on them, which I thought is a strange way of writing K's.
Were they like the long, sort of leg at the bottom?
Yes, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is some real font stuff, but like in the way that you would have a J, for example, dip below the line when you are writing.
Yeah.
You don't typically do that with a K, and maybe it was a common fashion of the time to write K's with the bottom part extending below the baseline of the font zone.
Yeah. Funny you should bring that up, because this week I actually, having watched a couple of these movies with very similar sort of intertitle fonts, I found a font online that is like the typeface of these intertitles with the weird K's.
Nice.
Yeah. I thought about maybe trying to like switch the font in the video for that, but I think the font in there is too classy. It's like it's gotta stay.
The font that we have for our logo and whatnot.
I tried like switching it out to see like how it would look, but it's like, it's too much.
It's I think it's like one of those like default Adobe Premiere fonts.
I know, but
whatever.
It's perfect. But yeah, I want to like, I don't know what use I will have for this font, but I'm looking at it. I have my notes written in it right now. So.
Oh wow. we're getting in the font zone lately.
This is probably a good place to talk about the thing this movie is best known for, kind of, which is Lon Chaney's performance and makeup.
Yeah. And it's interesting that, for the first half hour of this movie, you don't even see Lon Chaney.
Mhm.
He is appearing in shadow.
A lot of
and
good
up until
shadow work.
For sure, especially in the background of intertitles, which is really neat. Where he's kind of swimming around, looking ominous in the background, but with the text in front of him, it feels very dynamic to have like an intertitle with the motion behind it that this movie has at some points. But Christine initially thinks that he is like this benefactor spirit who is helping her out which in a way he is in her opera career and helping her with music. And then yes, when she sees his creepy mask, which I don't know who's involved in the creepy mask, but it prepares you for the even creepier face.
Yeah, you'd think you'd maybe pick a less creepy mask to kind of throw off the fact that his face is all skull looking. I was very like, I'd seen images from this movies and clips and things, so like I knew what the makeup looked like, but I was still kind of taken aback just by like how well it holds up, and how it's just like he doesn't look like a real person. Like he's like changes his whole, like, the shape of his entire head.
Yeah, definitely. After we've seen in He Who Gets Slapped, Lon Chaney without, heavy makeup on.
Right, he's still doing
what his
clown
face
makeup,
looks like.
Yeah.
But at the beginning of that movie, you see him in normal garb, and so we know what he looks like, and it really draws a big contrast between the hours and hours of makeup that he surely did to put on the Phantom face.
Yeah.
Which I understand why they had a lot of shots of him with the mask back on again, because I'm sure that slowed things down a little bit for him to have to redo the makeup every time.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, it's legitimately quite scary looking. Like,
yeah,
especially when it's like he's just kind of leering right into the lens. It's like, damn, this is intense.
Yeah, in addition to this like really heavy and spooky makeup, there are a lot of really dramatic shadows that are being cast on his face the whole time.
Yeah, it's very underlit.
His face is very angular, so it captures those shadows really well.
Yeah, I was reading about sort of like the process he had to go through to like get into the full makeup, and it was apparently very painful and uncomfortable, because like he was like the fake scalp, the fake teeth, and he like stuffed stuff in his cheeks to kind of make his cheekbones bigger, and then to sort of get his nose to look the way this sort of like flat, weird, like skull nose, he put wire in his nostrils to like flatten them back against his nose, I guess.
Wow.
Which like after I guess a couple of hours they would start bleeding, and so it was like he really committed hard to the makeup in this movie, but it paid off.
What a guy.
Yeah.
Lon Chaney.
And that's like every Lon Chaney movie where he does makeup, it seems like that's sort of the story behind it, is like he goes way too hard on it, and it looks incredible, but it was like incredibly uncomfortable or painful for him to do.
He's dedicated, even when he is doing Yellowface a couple weeks, months later. God, what? A couple years later. I don't know what this podcast is called. Speaking of like some of the shadows involved, there's a lot of really great shadow stuff in this movie. We've talked about the sort of underlit catacombs sequences, but also there's a really cool shot as some of the Phantom's murders are being revealed, where there's like a stagehand who's kind of turning this big wheel
Yeah.
To kind of raise up a door or a curtain. You
Curtain,
can't exactly tell what it is. And so you're seeing the curtain, the silhouette of the curtain or the shadow of the curtain raising in the same shot behind him. So all of this kind of drama is unfolding behind the camera, and as the shadow of the curtain raises, it reveals the shadow of a hanging corpse.
Oh.
Which is so good.
Yeah. I think I might have like paused the movie just to like admire that shot. I was just like, so good.
Yeah, really well composed, really good reveal for sure.
Yeah. Maybe one of the better uses of shadows I feel like I've seen in anything, honestly. It was great. There's a really great shot. So right after Christine sees his spooky face, he lets her go, kind of, and is a big jerk about it. And then we get this section of the movie that's shot in 2-strip Technicolor. It's pretty cool. And the Phantom is like at a ball at the Opera House wearing this big red cloak. And there's a great bit where Christine is up on the roof and the Phantom is like spying on her. And the Phantom is like hanging off of a gargoyle wearing this big red cloak that's like billowing in the wind. Incredible shot.
Oh man, what? The version that I watched did not have the color in
Really?
that scene. Yeah, I thought that at least on the Blu-ray, the only version that has the color in that scene, I think, is the 1929 version.
Oh, weird.
Maybe you found some kind of composite of some other prints or something, but mine was like just a scan of a 16 millimeter, like tinted and toned version.
Yeah, I mean that's how most of the movie is. But yeah, there's that one section that's, I mean it's 2-strip for like the inside part, and then when he's up on the roof, it looks like it's like hand painted color. It has that sort of sloppier looking, coming out off the lines a little bit. But
this isn't some pate color accuracy.
No, yeah. Yeah, I'm surprised that that's not in, because I think whatever version of it I watched was maybe a different Blu-ray release of it. I don't know. That's a whole rabbit hole to go down.
A lot of traps and chambers that the Phantom has built or has like reclaimed in his discovery of old torture chambers.
This is a reclaimed torture chamber.
$400 a night on Airbnb. One of them is the Room of Many Mirrors, a torture chamber, like an old torture chamber. So Christine's boyfriend and an undercover cop who has been investigating the Phantom for months. They finally are trying to catch him, and they end up falling into the Room of Many Mirrors, which is quite a title. In the book, I think this scene is not described, or this room is not described that way, because I thought, it was this very capitalized, like, Room of Many Mirrors, so a well-known thing. But in the book, it's like, this is a room that's similar to those funhouse mirror rooms where you can't see where you're going. The Phantom actually invented those, but you don't know that. So the Phantom has his own twist on the mirror maze, which is that he can crank up the heat in there so much that it almost kills people.
Yeah, and there's a really cool like camera effect to show that. I think it's like just double exposure of flames, but it's like it kind of adds this weird kind of shimmer because of the double exposure to things, which was really I don't know, it was subtle, and but it gave a real kind of like visual indication of just the heat in this room being cranked way up.
And of course the good guys end up escaping, and they escape into another trap,
Mm-hmm.
the, where he's flooding the room, and they're having to the classic kind of scene of them kind of swimming to the
Oh,
top,
yeah.
and then getting their last amount of air that they can.
Yeah.
But yeah, eventually, some kind of a disgruntled mob is able to find the Phantom, and they've got the classic torches and
Yeah.
all that kind of thing, and they are there to avenge one of the kind of random stagehands that
Mhm.
the Phantom has killed, as a measure of his threats. Which it's cool to see. Kind of feel like these movies or stories like this, they have sometimes a lot of collateral damage, and in many stories you're kind of trained to only care about the principal characters.
Mm-hmm.
But in this movie, it's like there is this character that is barely named and was just a random person that the Phantom killed, and his brother is the one who ends up, rallying
Mhm.
the mob to
Yeah.
end the Phantom. And they chase him down, as you were talking about. They chase him down the streets of Paris. That's a really cool scene. It feels
Mhm.
really like dynamic and quick of this chase scene, and they surround him and they beat him up and
Throw him in a river or a canal.
yeah. Raising the possibility for a sequel. Did he survive in the water?
Which I don't think is in the book, right? Doesn't the book have a different ending?
I don't know.
Oh, well. Guess we'll find out.
The only thing I know about the book is that I control F'd for Room of Many Mirrors, and then read a passage from there.
Gotta know about this Mirror Room. Pretty cool movie. Not like,
Yeah,
didn't blow me away, but I was like, definitely as like a Lon Chaney vehicle, I guess. I see why this is like the thing he's probably the most well remembered for.
yeah. I think honestly, I had like of the overall quality, how much it grabbed me and everything
Mhm.
like that. I feel like I was finding myself thinking the same thing when I was watching this. Is like we're now, I think we're now in the era where, uh, it's not just some good movies and ones that are just incompetent. Like there
Mhm.
are well-made movies. You're just like, yeah, that was good.
Yeah.
It's a good movie.
Yeah, well
It's
done.
not mind-blowing. You don't have to talk about it forever, but it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Watch it if you like.
Yeah. Cool movie.
We could talk about a movie that really did blow me away. A movie that I thought was, I think, earns its place in the hallowed halls of legendary films, which is Battleship Potemkin.
Mm. I mean, the big daddy of this year, I would say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Certainly, the most famous movie from this year, one of the most famous silent films. This is the second film from Sergei Eisenstein.
Mm-hmm.
He'd come from the theater, and he had made one short and then one previous movie called Strike, that came out this same year. But Battleship Potemkin, I watched Strike as well, but Battleship Potemkin is just leagues ahead of kind of anything that I've seen so far.
I mean, yeah,
like,
it sticks out for sure.
I feel like we tend to try and resist these established narratives of what is important in film history and what what is this revolutionary thing, or at least we don't try and resist them actively as much as try and look at these things clearly and come up with our own interpretations and not succumb to the established narrative of what are the important movies. But
yeah,
holy moly, this movie is it's like a huge step ahead, I think, in presentation, in emotional engagement, in editing, in style. It's mind-blowing. This movie's so good.
I think too, it like, I don't know if there's like a lot of individual things that this movie necessarily is doing that hasn't been done before. It's the fact that it's using them all in conjunction and all with real intent. I feel like that's kind of what stuck out to me with it, is it's like,
Yeah.
even a lot of the kind of the more forward thinking like editing techniques and things like that in it are like, they're not, this movie isn't sort of like breaking through any massive barriers in terms of like the individual technical things it's doing. It's more that it's just like, this movie just feels better than, and by better I just mean it I think it's using all these tools that have been building up over the last several years of filmmaking, and it's just putting them all to like the best possible use.
Yeah, I mean, I think it helps a lot that this movie is very focused in its aims.
Mm-hmm.
It being a propaganda movie.
Yeah.
But what comes out of that is its ability to say, like, what am I doing at every moment? And how can I emphasize that the best? So, like you're saying, there isn't necessarily any individual thing that this movie has done before, except take these kind of things that have been played with a little bit, like close, like this movie has way more effective close-ups than much of what we've seen so far. It's got shots which are fairly like metaphorical of the moment, but it's got all this really quick editing, so it will hop to these shots that get a vibe across and then go back to what was happening. And it's been done before, but it's so effective in here because it knows what it's doing with every shot. If we're to look at something like Kino Eye from last year, a lot of that kind of quick cutting felt somewhat unmotivated. But there are individual shots that are not necessarily telling you any new information, but they're contributing thoughtfully to the feeling of the scene.
Yeah, that is actually a really good way of putting it, I think. Well, had you seen this movie before?
Oh yeah, plenty of times. It had been a while though.
Same.
It had been long enough that I forgot how good it is.
Yeah, I mean, I like this movie more watching it this time than I think I ever have.
Me too.
Probably because I was able to watch it in like greater context, and like I appreciated the things it was doing a lot more. One of my like early things in college was I had to recut this movie to like
Me too.
tell a different story. It was just like, do something with it. The thing I tried to do is I tried to make it into a pirate movie, which was not the most inspired choice, I feel like. I think the most interesting thing I did was there's a shot early on of like the captain of the battleship sort of looking through binoculars, and then I took that shot and a different shot of a bunch of boats, and I put like the binocular mask over it.
Oh, nice.
Several other people in the class, I think, did much more interesting things with it. Like I feel like the one that I there are two that I want to talk about. One is that my friend Cody Jackson, who might be a future guest on the show, did one that I didn't even know that he had done this at the time, but the teacher showed it as like an example of how to do this assignment right. And it was so good that I actually, for a moment, I didn't remember it wasn't actually part of the movie. I was like, when does that scene happen? And I was like, oh no, that isn't actually in the real movie. But he took, there's a shot of like the priest on the ship. He's got this great face. And there's footage where he's sort of like tapping a cross in his hand. The re-edit of it was that every time he like the cross hit his palm, it cut to like a scene of violence, like someone being shot or like a building exploding or like this sort of stuff. And it was like, the violence done in the name of religion. You know, this was all inferred from just the sort of like sequence of edits. And that was the one that like the teacher showed us, like, this is the best one that anyone's ever done. And then I didn't find out until years later that's my friend had made that one. And then the other one is someone, I think probably just as a joke, took the shots of them like cleaning the cannons and put like sultry, like suggestive music over it. Which is such a dumb thing, but is, I think, showed a much greater sort of like I think it's a much better re-edit than what I did, where I like tried to make this like pirate action scene out of it, where it's like, this is super simple. They're just taking a bunch of shots that are sort of like vaguely suggestive once you put like silly music over them. But it's, in terms of like taking something and re-editing it and recontextualizing it, I think that actually was one of the better examples that I saw in the class.
I guess I took the same class and got the same assignment as you at a different time.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know that, I didn't remember that it was specifically Battleship Potemkin that we had to do this assignment on. I just remembered that I did it with this. But as you're describing all of this, it all feels very much in line with this kind of Soviet style of editing that we're seeing come together, of thinking about the associations within the edit. So it's a really thematically appropriate that the professor, who was it that assigned this for you?
Camilo Rojas.
Camilo. Okay, somebody else must have just used his
I don't know if he came up
then.
with that assignment or whatever. I think that was just what the class was.
I took an editing class at DCC with a different professor, but and it had the same assignment. But I think it gets at some of the same ideas that the Russians are playing with lately, with Kuleshov and Vertov and such, thinking about the nature of the relationship between shots and how to contextualize emotion within that. So I think that's really cool, the stuff that you're talking about. What I did was I re-edited the movie to be a kaiju movie. There are a lot of shots in this movie of people running from things or pointing off screen, and like looking, even kind of looking up and pointing off screen and going, "Oh my god, look at that thing!" So I spliced a bunch of that stuff together to make it seem like there was a big monster.
Yeah, great.
I guess back to the actual movie.
Right.
This is not a monster movie or a pirate movie. Though there is some
it's a mutiny
criticism
movie
of religion in here. Yes, it is. It is a mutiny movie. It is set. It is based on the true story that is kind of happening on the eve of the Russian Revolution, and there are in the broad strokes, there are a bunch of sailors on a battleship called Potemkin, and they are getting fed this kind of rotten, disgusting meat, and just terrible food by their superiors, and they're saying, like, how can you feed us this food? Like, look, there's maggots in it. And they call the ship's doctor up, and he's just like, these are fine. Just wash them off.
Yeah.
You know?
Just scrape the maggots off. It'll be fine.
More and more disrespect that they're getting from their superiors, who are very, like, clearly kind of meant to be the bourgeoisie, and kind of act in this way of how they're controlling the lives of the workers and treating them like dirt, right? And so they make these plans to kind of band together and kind of show their solidarity as workers. In this case, they are in the military, but there's a lot of parallels in this movie between the worker and owner dynamic. And so when the mutiny is effectively a military strike, what they're doing in this movie. And I think that if you were to compare it to his previous movie, Strike, in Strike, it portrays the bourgeoisie as like bumbling and like foolish. They're just these like rich fat cats who are, you know, just silly and stupid in their wealth. But in Battleship Potemkin, they're genuinely menacing and threatening.
Yeah.
This movie really makes an emotional case, more than anything else, for what is happening. Uh, there's like intellectual stuff going on. There's, you know, allegory and whatnot. But I think what's so powerful about this movie and why it grabs you so much is that, like, you feel for what's happening and you care about what's happening, because it, like, you're watching people getting killed that are trying to do the right thing for, like, not accepting that they're gonna eat, like, maggoty meat,
Mhm.
you know. And so, yeah, I think it's very effective in that way. I honestly have not seen many movies being this, like, emotionally gripping.
Mm.
Just from, like, the kind of broad strokes of what's happening being told so well.
I think it does such a good job of like focusing on like reaction shots. I feel like there's a lot more, like you were saying, there's a lot of close-ups in this, and a lot of scenes play out instead of in like these like big wide master shots like a lot of silent movies tend to do. A lot of the scenes in this tend to cut between like close-ups of individual people in a space or in a room. There's a lot of, yeah, just like faces reacting to things. It really kind of like puts you into, I don't know, this movie gets subjective very well. I feel like a lot of the other things we've seen tend to be a bit more objective and sort of like, here's a scene. It's theatrical in that way, right? Where it's like, you can see all the characters, they're acting out in the scene, we're observing. It's kind of fly on the wall. Whereas this movie really kind of feels like it's putting you into the action or into the emotion in a much kind of more, I don't know, yeah, subjective way.
Yeah. And in addition to, like, some of the other formal stuff going on in this movie, there are so many amazing compositions in this.
Oh yeah.
Like, there are hundreds of shots in this movie, like way more shots in this movie than most other movies, and almost all of them have some, like, really interesting angle or, like, shadow being cast or, like, object in the frame that's creating, like, an interesting shape. Like, it's like he can't resist making really cool compositions with every shot.
Mm-hmm.
And you could pull almost any of these shots out and they're just beautiful individually.
Yeah. It's funny because I rewatching this, I was like, I had such kind of flashbacks to just like scrubbing through parts of the movie and like picking individual shots out that I wanted to like use in the re-edit. So it's like there's sections of this movie that I remember super, super well because I had to like go through them with a comb and like take, you know, individual frames out here and there and things like that. But yeah, this movie is a visual masterclass kind of. It is like, yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, this movie's famous for a reason. It's real good.
Yeah. So the officers on the ship are basically kind of call everyone up to the front, and or to the bow of the boat, and there's once again this really cool shot being framed by the turrets of the boat.
Yeah.
Where with all of the soldiers standing in between them, and they say, whoever likes the food that we've got, step forward. And all of the class traitors and and officers and weenies step forward, and they're like, "Okay, great. You're the ones who we aren't going to kill." So pretty much all of the crew is about to get murdered over insubordination because they're not happily eating gross food. There is a primary character who I'm forgetting his name.
Is
off
it
the top of my head.
Vakulanchuk? Vakulanchuk.
Vakulanchuk is the kind of principal person who is organizing all of the workers or
the crew,
is behind the mutiny. And he says, okay, now's the time, basically. And as a group of soldiers is put under a blanket about to just be blindly shot at, he yells to the people shooting, like, these are your brothers, like,
Yeah.
you can't do this, like, and they, like, you can't just kill these people over nothing. And they hesitate for a second, and in that hesitation, all hell breaks loose. And
Great scene.
they start capturing and throwing the officers off the boat or killing them, and eventually there's a scuffle in one of the rooms of the ship, and Vakulinchuk is killed.
Mm-hmm.
And he becomes this martyr later on. Eventually they're able to take over the entire boat, and there's like a scolding priest there too. I guess just in a moment of, we don't like religion, man.
That they knock on the stairs.
Yes, yeah. He's like an old man, and they just like push him down the stairs, and it seems like a little brutal, but also he's being a jerk, so I guess he deserves it. Eventually they succeed, and they raise up a red flag for communism. And it's the one hand-painted part of the movie is the red flag. The rest of it is just straight up black and white. So we got a bit of a Schindler's List kind of thing going on, or Sin City.
Which, I mean, at this point, I'm just realizing that's just a silent movie thing. Like, there's a lot of kind of selective color use.
For sure.
Much more so than I ever realized that there was. So,
yeah. Vakulinchuk dies, and they bring the boat back to shore as triumphant workers' heroes. They tell the story of what happened, and this kind of heroic group of sailors who had overthrown their masters. And a lot of this is happening at the same time that kind of revolutionary activity is happening on the mainland. And the people on the boat were inspired by that. And so they tell the story of what happened on the boat, and they make a memorial on shore for Vakulinchuk. They put his body in a tent, and then people line up really, really far to go and pay their respects to him. I was watching this with a friend of mine who is Russian, and she was reading out all of the Russian intertitles as they went by, and I also put a communist hat I have on her, just so we could, because I'm always chasing that immersive 4D experience.
There you go.
With every movie. But she was saying that this scene reminded her of Lenin, and how people will line up to see Lenin's body and pay their respects to him,
which I'm sure is like intentional. I don't know,
yeah.
But like that's very topical for when this movie was made.
Exactly. This movie came out shortly after Lenin died. I don't know if they had like a kind of formalized memoriam, mausoleum situation.
You don't know if the mummy was ready yet.
Yeah, if the Lenin mummy was ready yet, but it does have some similarities, and I guess it speaks also to this kind of Soviet way of having these kind of individual heroes that we worship for their qualities of, revolutionary spirit or whatever, which is kind of interesting in this movie, because part of the point that it's making, I think, with the way that it's being presented, is this kind of collectivist point where Vakulinchuk is like one of the main named characters, but he dies very quickly, and there are also a lot of other characters who are not named, and we don't focus on them very much. There isn't like a main character of this movie like at all, which is very uncommon, I think. Like, we don't have like a point of view character. It is following ideas and groups of people,
Mm-hmm.
because it's trying to make this point about like solidarity and collectivism.
Yeah. Yeah, for like a narrative like this, it is true that it is unusual in that respect of even now, like movies tend to have like one central point of view character. Whereas yeah, you're right, this doesn't really. And yet it still works. It still feels like you're able to kind of get caught up in it. It's not as distancing as it might come across.
Which I was surprised by, honestly.
Mhm.
Like I feel like, there's a reason why a lot of movies follow a principal character or a couple characters.
Yeah.
It's because like they offer you a viewpoint into what's happening. But this movie grips you so much with just the specifics of what is happening
Mhm.
that I think it still works just as well, if not better.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I thought about naturally this movie is like probably one of the most sort of things it's most famous for is its editing. And it's sort of like its place in like the Soviet school of montage editing and that sort of thing. I was less montagey than I think I either remembered or thought it would be.
Uh-huh.
In terms of like most of the editing is most of the scenes play out within like a single time frame. Like there's not a lot of weird wild sort of like playing with time or space. It's like a scene plays out in a single space among many different characters and there's a lot going on, but it's like it isn't necessarily playing with time or space in the way that I think of with like montage editing, how it's like kind of throws that out the window. And I feel like this film doesn't do that as much as some of like the later 20s, like Man with the Movie Camera is just like, I feel like Dziga Vertov is going further in that direction of just like abandoning
Time and space.
Spatial or like temporal continuity, I guess. But this movie the editing is so much about creating like pacing and tension and like cutting between, like creating like stillness by like cutting around to like a bunch of things. Even though it's a quick edits, it's like creating the sense of like, I feel like early on in the movie, there's such a sense of like bottled energy that's happening where it's like,
yeah, anticipation.
There's all this stuff that's just building, and then it just kind of explodes. And that happens a couple times throughout the movie where it just like will build and build and build and build tension until it's kind of released by something. And that's something that we've seen a bit of that with like the sort of woman trapped in a room movies that are about kind of creating the sense of tension and pacing, but it's like,
wait, what are you talking about? Women trapped in a room?
The D.W. Griffith classic.
Oh yeah. Lone-Dale Operator.
Suspense. One of those. The medicine cabinet or whatever. The medicine bottle. The worst one. Rewatching this movie with an eye towards like how it's kind of pushing editing forwards. It was less montagey than I had sort of thought it would be, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's like I think what's special about it is that it's using some of these principles with a very focused purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's part of what my issue with Vertov movies, is, at least as far as I've seen them or remember them, is that they don't seem focused.
Right.
But this movie is taking those ideas and then using them very deliberately to tell stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And using the editing to emphasize the emotion of stories.
Yeah, I feel like Dziga Vertov is playing with the form probably more so than Sergei Eisenstein is.
Mm-hmm.
But Sergei Eisenstein is actually like doing narrative stuff with it, and so it feels a lot more impactful, and you're able to get emotionally invested in it in a way that Dziga Vertov stuff is just sort of like neat.
Yeah. There's a point where we move to the most famous part of this movie.
Yeah.
Which is the Odessa Steps sequence.
The most famous stairs in all of cinema.
Until we got to Joker.
Oh, God.
2019.
No, I still think this takes a cake.
Oh, God. How does this even get set up?
After the mutiny and they take over the battleship, the I guess this would be the army of the Russian Empire gets sent in to kind of quell the rebellion or the mutiny, and there are all these people who are sort of like camped out on the steps, and they get sort of cornered. They send a bunch of soldiers down from the top of the steps and start kind of shooting into the crowd and chasing them down, and there's this kind of mad stampede down the stairs, and then when they get to the bottom of the stairs, there's more soldiers at the bottom of the stairs, and they're kind of trapped between, and they all get massacred.
Yeah, and it's pretty much all like civilians who are getting killed.
Yeah, it's
just
all
people
like
who,
old women, children, baby carriages.
yeah, and so yeah, it's making this kind of another sort of emotional case for the revolution in like showing the kind of monstrosity of the old empire.
Yeah.
And this scene has a lot of motion. It also has a lot of quick cutting. It's got a lot of violence in it. This
it also is it does a really good job of suggesting violence without explicitly showing it always.
True. But it also shows some pretty
Yeah,
explicit
it does.
violence.
It does both. Yes.
Probably the most famous shot from this movie is from this scene, which is a woman who kind of either gets shot in the eye or like has some kind of like shrapnel that gets in her eye, and she's like clutching her face, and there's all this blood coming down from her eye. This is during this scene to a poor old woman. The other kind of famous shot from this scene is
the oft copied or homaged.
The oft copied, and honestly, I think it goes on a little too long, and like it's trying to build that tension like this movie is good at, but then it maybe pushes it a little too far and becomes a little silly, but maybe that's just in retrospect. The scene of the baby carriage that is tilting right on the edge of falling down the stairs. And is it going to fall? Oh no, there's a baby in there. What happens? And then the carriage rolls down the stairs and crashes.
Yeah, rolls down the stairs as like people are fleeing and being shot.
Yeah,
I don't know. I think it's still a pretty great scene. Like
it's very effective. It's good. I just like it pushed it a little far for me to think it was like a little silly, but
right. It's also like it's one of those things where once it's been in like The Simpsons, it's kind of harder to take it seriously as like a real dramatic scene. But it's like most things that have been parodied in The Simpsons, it's like, yeah, you go back to it, it works in its original context.
The first time that I saw The Shining was at the Alamo Draft House, and I was watching the pre-show before that, and they were playing
the
parts
Shinning
of the Shinning from The Simpsons, and I was honestly kind of mad that they did that, because the scene in The Shining where Jack is like losing his mind and chasing Wendy up the stairs with the baseball bat or the axe or whatever, and he's like making these weird faces and noises, and it's like creepy, but like it's just on the edge of silly. It's riding a fine line, and I think having just watched the Simpsons episode where it pushes it over that line kind of ruined that scene for me.
Yeah. Damn.
But we'll get to The Shining.
Yeah.
As this massacre is happening, it kind of gets back to the people on the ship. That the Russian Empire is kind of doing all this horrendous stuff to try and quell the rebellion. So they turn the turrets of their ship in toward the shore, and they blow up the house of the governor or whoever.
Yeah.
The head honcho in charge of the government. There are some stone lions.
Some surprised lions.
Yeah, it is in kind of the most conspicuous usage of montage.
Right.
The lions kind of stand up and are shocked at what is happening as the house around them explodes. And so the soldiers end up kind of uh, uh, I don't know, taking over,
Yeah.
and then the glorious communists win.
Yeah, I think some of the editing in this movie is a bit sloppy from from like with modern standards. I do think this movie does a good job of like not every new shot is necessarily showing you more information, but like the repetition of them is really important and that sort of thing. But there's occasional parts in this movie where I'm like, just because you can edit doesn't mean you have to.
As an editor, were you a little like tone it down?
Well, it's like I see what it's trying to do, and I think it is mostly effective in that thing of like the mere fact of the amount of edits is like creating this sense of pacing or this sense of rhythm. And yeah, there's a reason I think this movie is like still taught in school to like show good use of editing. I don't know, like if I had to come up with something negative to say about this movie, I'm like, well, some of it's maybe a little sloppy, but that's only really taking it from like a modern, with modern eyes. Still better than Taken 3 or whatever.
I think that also, if you compare it to a lot of other movies at the time, if you were to look at the editing that they're doing, like this is doing so much editing, and if you're to look at some of the editing in these more plainer movies, you could say like that it's sloppy in certain ways too. But I don't know. Yeah, I like this a lot. I should say actually that I might have misstated the scene where the red flag was shown. I think that's more toward the end.
Oh, well.
But so don't come correcting us unless you want to hop in the YouTube comments and increase our engagement.
There you go. Please correct us.
Yeah, no, I think this movie is real good.
Yeah.
Hot take, Battleship Potemkin, good movie.
Yeah, agreed.
What should we hop to next?
Let's hop to our old standby, Mr. Charles Chaplin.
Charles when he's being formal and making a drama, and Charlie.
I mean, it is true
to his friends.
He is always credited as a director as Charles, but I like to make the distinction sometimes. I mean, we're talking about the Gold Rush.
The Gold Rush,
which is, as stated in the early intro title, a dramatic comedy.
Yeah, I like this. I found it. I mean, it's often hard to talk about slapstick comedy movies, though there is a lot more kind of narrative stuff going on in this one than previous ones. But I actually found myself gripped enough that I did not take any notes.
Oh, there you go.
Which is a good sign, but we'll see how that turns out.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like this is a pretty famous one of his movies. It's like it's up there.
Yeah.
In the canon. I'd never seen this one.
I hadn't either, and this is the first comedy that he's made since The Kid.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a couple of years since he's done comedy.
Yeah, and I think this movie does a kind of a better job of balancing the comedy and the drama than The Kid. I think The Kid is like, it's very funny or it's very dramatic, and I feel like it's
a little, yeah.
It felt a little flip-floppy at times. Whereas this, I think, does a better job of kind of like seeding both throughout the whole thing, where it's like scenes play out and they're kind of simultaneously funny and a little sad or a little dramatic.
Yeah, he's a real beat down guy in this.
Yeah,
there's like a lot of people who are just exceedingly mean to him in this movie.
For sure. I don't know, this movie felt a little bit less, I guess, kind of modeling, or I don't know. I feel like there's times in The Kid where I'm like, all right, we get it. It's sad.
It's a little overdone. Yeah, it's like Baby's first attempt at drama, you know.
Right. Which isn't to say there's not good stuff in that movie, but I think I overall I think of the Chaplin movies that I've seen that are sort of like trying to trying to kind of thread this needle between comedy and drama. I think this was the most successful one that I've seen so far.
I would
Maybe.
agree, but also I think that like it wasn't as funny as other movies, which is maybe part of what's going on, right? It's like there were some real good laughs in this movie. I laughed. I thought it was
Mhm.
funny at points, but like overall, it doesn't feel like you're watching like a laugh a minute movie, you know?
No. Yeah. And it's definitely compared to like the other, like the Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd movies, like those movies are so like laugh every second. Like
Yeah.
the amount of jokes happening per second in those is like mind-boggling. Whereas this is taking it a little slow. But yeah, I mean, just so this movie is about Chaplin, sort of like a classic tramp character, going off to the north of Alaska to make his fortune in the gold rush, hence the title. And
The tramp really just like is a character who transcends time and space,
pretty much,
and he's just an elemental who
Yeah.
can appear wherever.
I did think the kind of reveal of him, there's sort of this intro of like setting up how people are like going out into the mountains of Alaska to find gold, and we see all these sort of, you know, explorers and people like climbing up mountains and things like that, and then it's like, and then the reveal of Charlie Chaplin just kind of like waddling onto screen on a mountaintop in his completely normal like costume was very funny.
Yes. And waddle is a good word for the way that
Yeah.
he moves.
And yeah, the first like chunk of this movie is him kind of trying to get out of a blizzard. And him and another prospector end up finding this cabin, and they're all kind of like, the guy who's already in the cabin is a criminal who's on the lam, and they're all kind of competing for who can stay in the cabin. There's a lot of like gags, and there's like whenever they open the door, the wind comes in and like pushes them out.
Yeah.
The door gags got to me. Those were good. I enjoyed all the door gags.
I was kind of surprised when I was watching this at how long they spent in the cabin.
Yeah.
Like I was initially thinking like that almost the entire movie, this is going to be a Hateful Eight situation. They were just snowed in for the entire movie. But eventually they do get out, but they spend a lot of time and there's like some menace in this movie and kind of like fear in a way, because you know, the tramp is this very innocent character who is just trying to get by, and he's surrounded by people who are so hungry or villainous that they want to eat him or or kill him.
Just a little light cannibalism humor.
There's a really good scene that, and like I feel like this movie is also the genesis of. I think maybe Buster Keaton is the most direct predecessor of Looney Tunes, but there are some like Looney Tunes ass like things in this movie.
I mean,
including this scene where one of the characters is dreaming about eating Charlie Chaplin.
Yeah.
And he transforms. He kind of like fades in his mind into being a giant chicken.
Yeah.
Which is very cartoony and fun.
It's something that I will pretty much always find funny, is when someone is really hungry in a movie or a cartoon and they like hallucinate someone into a giant piece of food.
Yeah.
Which this is like, he's hallucinating Charlie Chaplin into just a full live chicken. Just a giant chicken man.
Good chicken acting too. Like the way that I don't know if it's Charlie in the costume or not, but like whoever's in the costume is doing a great job kind of emulating the movements of a chicken.
Yeah. And yeah, there's a lot of good little jokes thrown in here. There's a bit where Charlie Chaplin eats one of his shoes. Which I think I remember hearing that he like made the shoe out of licorice or something like that, or he made this edible shoe that he eats in the scene. Really makes a meal out of this scene, you know what I mean? Um, he does though. Like it's really all the business of him sort of like taking the shoe out of the pot that's boiling and sort of like taking it apart and like picking the nails like out of it that are holding the shoe
Yeah.
together.
And there's like really good, just subtle jokes of, he's boiling the shoe so that he can eat the leather of the shoe because they're all so hungry, and he's like kind of using like picking the nails through his teeth as
Mhm.
if they're bones.
Yeah.
Which is it's just solid gag work.
This section of the movie does kind of feel reminiscent of like the earlier like one or two real comedy movies of just like here is a location, we're gonna do all the jokes for this location we can and then move on.
Yeah. In a way, like, this, I don't know, this cabin and prospector and cannibalism stuff is maybe the first half hour, like maybe 40 minutes of the movie.
Mhm.
And like the plot proper kind of kicks in
Right.
once they get out
Yeah.
of the shack.
Yeah, they get into town in like this prospector town. That in this section in the cabin, there's another great just like visual gag is you see like the tramp's shoes hanging off the bed, and you think that he's sleeping one way, and then he reveals he's actually wearing the shoes on his hands, so he can look to see if he's getting snuck up on. Yeah, just a great, funny visual reveal there.
Yeah.
But yeah, then he gets out of the cabin, he goes to town, and we meet one of our principal characters, Georgia, who's the female lead of this movie, and definitely stuck out to me as like a kind of an atypical like romantic lead for a Chaplin movie, in that she kind of sucks. Like,
yeah,
she's not like an ingenue, like hapless, like innocent woman who's just trying to like make her way in life. She's like, I don't know, just a bit more of a, like a vampy character.
Yes, and also just like, just, I don't know, mean.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I kind of appreciated that just as like something different for these movies, because it didn't feel like a repeat of a lot of his earlier stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's like an avenue. I think that previously the romantic, object of his films have been kind of the source of comedy, in that, or in the way that these slapstick movies work. It's like, I'm trying to impress the lady or something like that, but here, the romantic interest is kind of this source of like heaviness and drama.
She's kind of the antagonist for like a good chunk of the movie, I feel like.
I like she, in some of the more kind of schmaltzy and like maybe overdone scenes of the movie, it's like the tramp, or the prospector as he's known in this movie, like basically having some real like incel moments based on the way that this woman is treating him. So he, she kind of dances with him as a way of like taunting her boyfriend.
Mm-hmm.
And then the tramp quickly falls for her and is like, oh, you wanted to dance with me? That's great. Do you want to come back to my place and I'll make dinner for you? And she's like, sure, whatever.
Yeah.
And then she promptly forgets or doesn't care, and then is back with her boyfriend. And so there's this scene that is built out of the tension of intercutting, and also just the kind of stakes that are involved in what has been established in the romantic story, where he's really hopeful about this person. He really feels for her, and so he makes a whole dinner for her and her friends, and he gets it all prepared in his new apartment in
His
in
shack.
Prospector Town, his shack in Prospector Town. And there are all of these scenes of her just kind of, wantonly partying while he is getting ready to have a nice dinner and getting presents for everybody.
Well, this is on New Year's Eve, so she's at like a New Year's Eve party. While he is sort of like preparing this very elaborate dinner. I don't know where he got any of he's got nice napkins and candles. He's like going all out. Yeah, it's sort of like as the night drags on, it's sort of like he's still kind of just waiting there. And eventually he just sort of starts, I guess, imagining, or not really hallucinating. It's more just like his imagination coming out.
Does he fall asleep?
I don't remember if he actually falls asleep or not. But there's this sort of like fantasy he has of being surrounded by all the people he invited at the table. And he does his famous bread dance with the loaves of bread on forks.
Yeah, definitely the most famous scene from this movie, and one of the more famous scenes from all of silent film, where he I mean, it's kind of a fun thing.
It is very fun and charming. I like the bread dance.
If you haven't seen it, he takes some forks and puts them in little dinner breads, whatever you call them, little tiny loaves, and makes them into big cartoon feet, and then makes them dance.
Yeah.
To entertain his party guests, because he is he's an incel type that does magic and and tries to impress people with silly things.
Yeah. And so then, Georgia never shows up, and she kind of feels bad about it, but also not really enough to, like, I don't know, do anything about it.
Yeah.
And then there's this bit where she writes like a love note to her boyfriend and signs it. And then
she says also sorry for last night.
Right, yeah. And then the boyfriend plays a very mean prank on Charlie by giving him the note then and being like, "Hey, the lady wanted me to give you this note."
This movie is so brutal to him.
Yeah, this movie is very like mean to the main character for sure. But so then I guess the guy that he had been stuck in the cabin with comes back, and he thinks he's like after him to try to eat him again. But then he catches up to him, and he just yells "the cabin," and it's like giant letters. That's something that we've noticed a bit more of, where it's like giant letters in intertitles to signify something being loud, and it being really small, like really small type to be like something far away or really quiet, which I think is fun.
This is a big typeface episode.
Yeah. But so then he ends up going back to the cabin to get to get his fortune, because the guy has discovered gold nearby.
And because they were friends with each other and didn't eat each other, and because Charlie helped this guy find where the gold was in relation to the cabin, I guess they end up becoming fabulously wealthy.
Yeah. Well, there's before that there is the great bit of the cabin hanging off the edge of the cliff, which is like teetering, balancing on the edge of the cliff that they have to deal with.
Another Looney Tunes moment for
very
sure.
much. Yeah.
I shan't skip over that because it's they fall asleep in the cabin and they wake up and the wind has blown it so much that the cabin has moved and it's as you were saying, teetering off the edge of a cliff.
But they don't know, so they're like walking around the cabin and it's like causing it to like tilt off the edge more, and
it's some good like big broad cartoony physical comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Also possibly another Simpsons reference here, where in the Mr. Plow episode where his truck goes off the edge of the cliff, and it's hanging there, and then he like turns the dial of the radio to slightly shift the weight back so that he's back on the road. Feels like a reference to this movie.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how early the sort of like tilting on the edge of a cliff gag came about. This is probably the earliest version of it that I've seen, but I don't know.
It's definitely an iconic usage.
Yeah. They manage to not fall off the cliff, and they get the gold, and they become fabulously wealthy. And one thing that I think is kind of fun with Chaplin's performance throughout this whole movie is like his body language shifts from like low to high status happen a lot, where it's like he'll be sort of very sheepish or very like holding himself very small, and then something will happen and he'll get this like boost of confidence, and he'll suddenly be like carrying himself very confidently, and those shifts are always really funny. Of just like you see him just like completely change his body language on a dime, and it's very good. But then he's on a boat, I guess from Alaska to somewhere, and photographer is like, hey, let's take a picture of you in your mining clothes. So he takes off all his fancy clothes and he puts on his tramp costume again. And while he's wearing that, he runs into Georgia again, who's like trying to take the ship to, find a better life for herself. And then they kind of reconnect and like, I don't know, admit their love for each other or whatever. And then she joins him in his portrait, and like the portrait photographer is trying to take the picture, and he's like, hey, quit smooching, you're ruining the picture. And he's like, stuff it. He's like, take your picture. Which I thought was like, I thought that was a pretty genuinely sweet way to end the movie.
Yeah, which is not the way that the re-release ends.
Ooh, really?
The re-release kind of makes their the re-release acknowledges them seeing each other and reconnecting a bit, but it does not have the romantic end of this movie. It just ends with them like walking off camera. It tones down some of the kind of romantic angle a little bit. It makes it so it was never really as much of a prospect as it is in this movie, or in this version of the movie.
That I think would probably play a bit more realistically, maybe. Like, I don't know if the sort of like romantic ending of this movie is particularly earned, based on how mean Georgia is to him throughout the entire rest of the movie.
Yeah.
And then she's sort of like, oh, well, I guess the point of the ending as it stands in the original one is that like she doesn't know that he's fabulously wealthy, and she still sort of like wants to be with him at the end before she knows that. But yeah, it does feel a bit unearned, I think. But I like just that last scene, I think is well done.
Good old Chaplin movie.
Yeah.
And we'll get on to our final feature.
Ooh.
Of the week, which is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Jurassic Park 2, the Lost World.
Yeah.
No, scratch the Jurassic Park part, but we make jokes here.
The Lost World.
The Lost World.
Good picture.
Yeah. Why don't you take the lead on this?
All right, sure. The Lost World. This is, I mean, other than King Kong, probably the most famous movie that Willis O'Brien worked on. Willis O'Brien did not direct this one. This was directed by Harry O. Hoyt. Not a name I was familiar with, but Willis O'Brien did all of the dinosaur effects, which are very cool.
That's what we're here for.
And yeah, this is based on the novel by Arthur Conan Doyle, most famous for creating Sherlock Holmes, but this is probably the thing he's second most famous for.
I actually had no idea that he did anything other than Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, he did. We might get into it a bit later, but he did a whole like, this book sparked a whole like different series of novels and short stories about Professor Challenger, which is, I guess, a character that Arthur Conan Doyle, when he was alive, seemed much more fond of than Sherlock Holmes. He was kind of famously like didn't really like writing Sherlock Holmes and was annoyed that it was so popular.
And you can tell that Arthur Conan Doyle likes this work because he appears at the beginning of this movie.
There's he does a little intro.
He's like, I'm Arthur Conan Doyle. I wrote this. It's about dinosaurs. Enjoy.
And yeah, so we meet our kind of main lead character, Ed Malone, who's a reporter in London, who wants to marry this woman Gladys, who tells him, "I will only marry a man of great deeds and strange experiences." And so she's sort of like, "You haven't done enough crazy shit, so I won't marry you. You need to do some crazier shit." And so then he takes an assignment to try to look into this Professor Challenger fella, who is an academic in London who is claimed to have discovered a lost world in South America where dinosaurs live. Professor Challenger looks like a Tintin character. He's got this crazy beard and head of hair.
He does.
And he is trying to put together an expedition to go to South America, and the stuffy academics in London are sort of like, this can never be. And they basically agree to go on an expedition just to prove him wrong. And so there's his sort of like academic rival, Professor Summerlee, who is the sort of main one, being like, I'm going to go on this expedition just to prove that you're a hack. And then there's also this sort of like, I guess, hunter explorer type Roxton, who also goes on the expedition. And then Malone has to break into Challenger's house just to kind of get, because Challenger hates reporters, but he kind of earns his respect by breaking into his house and
slash saying that he's a friend of a friend.
Yeah, but he proves his mettle, I guess, in doing so.
I mean, I guess if I were constantly ridiculed for telling people true stories about dinosaurs, I would probably hate the press too.
Understandable. But Challenger is a very fun character in that he is like a professor and he's like this academic explorer guy, but he's also just like this wild, crazy man who will like get in fights all the time and like throw chairs around a room. And so then they head off, and we get a nice, cool sort of like map travel shot of like a map, and we see like a little boat traveling down to South America from England, which is the first time I've seen that in something. A sort of like proto Indiana Jones map travel scene. And they get down to South America, and we sort of are meeting our characters as they're preparing to set out into the jungle. There's also, another reason why they agreed to go on the expedition is because there's been this other explorer who's disappeared, Maple White, and his daughter, what is her name?
He was on their last expedition,
right?
And his daughter is coming along to try and find her dad.
Yeah, and that's sort of like they've sort of agreed to do this expedition because it's like a rescue. It's not just an academic thing. And there's sort of a weird love triangle between Paula, Malone, and Roxton, even though Roxton is like a million years old. That was the thing.
The decrepit hunter.
Yeah, that was the thing that was invented for the film. Paula White doesn't exist in the novel. She was invented by the film. I like the addition of someone who's like emotionally invested in this thing for reasons other than just to prove dinosaurs exist. Like, she's kind of an underwritten character, but at the same time, I'm glad that that character exists in this, I think.
Yeah, she's like a good kind of like one of those classic like adventure movie characters of like the spunky girl who like is like, I can do everything that the men can do, you know.
And it's the 20s, so they don't really. I don't know how necessarily feminist this movie is about it, but
it's no, it's just I think it's just having her participate for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
But it is this kind of like proto like girl power figure.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, it's, they're like, hey, we can vote now. We can also
Oh yeah, true.
go look for dinosaurs. And then so yeah, Professor Summerlee is also there. He's the kind of stuffy academic. Yeah, I feel like the main thing about him is that he sucks. It's like everyone is like, oh, Summerlee, we hate this guy. I think they established that pretty early on with like, we can tell that about him because there's this a cute monkey named Jocko, and he's like, get out of here, I hate this monkey. And it's like, come on, dude, don't be hating on the monkey. But as they're traveling to the Lost World is on the top of a mountain, a plateau, in South America, which is almost definitely based on Mount Roraima, which is a real mountain in South America that is inspired this story as well as Up. Up is also, I mean, heavily inspired by The Lost World.
That makes sense.
Right. But so as they're sort of traveling through South America, we get a lot of like real animal footage, which is pretty cool, and I think actually ends up helping to kind of sell the dinosaur footage, because we're seeing all this footage of like alligators and jaguars and stuff. And then once we start seeing dinosaurs, it's sort of like presented in a very similar way. It's all stop motion animation, but it's like filmed in a similar way to how they've been using the real animal footage. And I think that was like a surprisingly effective way of sort of like grounding the effects of the movie, I thought.
In addition to all of that, they use a lot of kind of inventive. I think when there are special effects on screen, usually in these movies, it's in this very cordoned off area where, like, you can do a double exposure over a black background or something like that. And they do a lot in this movie to integrate the humans and like stop motion dinosaurs into the same shots in a way where there's clearly like a line that's happening like between two shots, but you can't see where that line is, and it's not straight.
It's
like,
really well hidden.
It's being like covered up by brush, in the wilderness or whatever. And so like I couldn't fully tell like where the two shots were being merged together. And so it sells it really well as being in the same space. It's also just like really showy special effects wise.
Yeah. So yeah, we've talked about Willis O'Brien before. He did Beast of Slumber Mountain and a couple other like shorts with dinosaurs or prehistoric creatures as stop motion animation. But this is
big dino guy.
Yeah, this is definitely the easily the most ambitious thing that he's done in terms of the effects, both in terms of like combining it with live action stuff, which is really well done, but then just the amount of animation that's in this movie and sort of like how complicated the scenes are, kind of.
There's a lot of, something that he pays attention to, I can tell in this and his other films, are adding this realism to his animated dinosaurs by making them breathe, which I think is something that would be easy to forget about. But the dinosaurs are always in motion, but it's not this like over exaggerated motion to like show like they're bobbing their head. They're not doing a Gertie the dinosaur like bobbing their head back and
right. They're
forth
not dancing
every time, like. But like even when Gertie was idle, it was moving back and forth because it's like it's got to move. It's animation,
right. Yeah.
But like it's very subtle and naturalistic animation.
Yeah, I think all the dinosaur behavior feels like it's very sort of like accurate to, I guess, the understanding of what dinosaurs would have acted like at the time. And it's like, I don't know, the dinosaurs in this are really expressive, both in terms of their body language and also just like sometimes their like actual like faces are really expressive.
Yeah.
But just like there's a lot of little details in the animation that really help sell that these are like animals with real behaviors. They're not just sort of like monsters. They're kind of like there's
Yeah.
the Triceratops like protecting the young one, like the baby Triceratops, and it's like a lot of just decisions that were put there to help sell that like these are animals that have interiority. You know what I mean? Like they have
Right.
like their behaviors feel like naturally occurring things that animals would do, as opposed to
It
just sort of
definitely
like they're not overly personified, I guess, in that way.
Yeah, it definitely feels like it is coming from some close study of real animal behavior,
Yeah.
and then transposing that onto some really naturalistic, well done stop motion animation. Another thing that I think is really impressive is just having multiple stop motion characters on screen doing different things at the same time.
Yeah.
Uh, this requires a lot of coordination and thought and just very deliberate action to be able to do that much complexity on screen at once when you're animating multiple things.
Yeah. And there's a lot of cool dinosaur fights in this movie of different dinosaurs fighting each other.
Yeah. It's some cool fight scenes, some bloody action.
Yeah, this movie's surprisingly like gory in the dinosaur scenes. Like they will like straight up like rip each other up, and there's a lot of blood, and it's like, oh, okay, didn't expect this necessarily. I think I had seen this movie as a kid, like years and years and years ago, but I don't think whenever I had seen it, it was probably a different cut of it. Like it was probably a less complete restoration.
Huh.
Not that I necessarily like remembered scenes being different or anything like that, but whenever I originally saw it, it was long enough ago that I don't think this version of it existed yet. Or like this restoration of it, certainly.
You noticed things that you didn't see before?
Not really, no. Like I definitely remembered certain big scenes of it, but I think there were a lot of, particularly the scenes with the human characters that I didn't remember as well, but I might have also just not been paying as much attention. Yeah, there's a bunch of cool dinosaurs in this. There's Allosaurs, there's Triceratopses, Styracosaurus, Brontosaurus. Gets called out specifically.
Surprisingly, no T-Rex.
I wonder, because there is an Allosaurus that I think gets called out by name, but then there's like a bigger carnivore dinosaur that I'm not sure is just supposed to be a bigger Allosaurus or if it's supposed to be a T-Rex, because
I see.
This is before they knew that T-Rex had the two fingers, so then it's like they kind of look the same. But yeah, I mean, I think for when this movie came out, it was probably pretty like on the cutting edge of like depictions of dinosaurs based on like up-to-date science, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
The Brontosaurus is pretty heavily featured. Brontosaurus, when I was a kid, there was always the thing of like Brontosaurus and the Patasaurus, same dinosaur, just different names. And then I think that got transferred to Brontosaurus doesn't exist, only a Patasaurus is the recognized name. And now I think it's at a place where they are considered separate species of dinosaur. They both exist separately. Brontosaurus is one dinosaur, Patasaurus is another dinosaur. But so,
what's your favorite dinosaur?
I mean, it's probably T-Rex. Like, it's the cool one. I don't know. Like, I don't feel like I have a hot take favorite dinosaur.
I've always been a Stegosaurus guy.
Which is funny because you now live in its home state.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Stegosaurus is the state fossil of Colorado, is it not?
I don't go around studying state fossils.
Well, I thought I saw a sign when I was there. I was on a hike and I thought I saw a sign. If I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, you might be right. Yeah,
but it's like Stegosaurus, state fossil.
I like those Stego boys.
I mean, they're great.
They got a good shape.
There's a Stego in this movie, right?
I believe so.
Yeah. Looking very similar to the one in King Kong. I think King Kong owes a lot to this movie too. Just this basic kind of structure of explorers going to a lost world. In that case, an island. In this case, a mountain.
Dinosaur
stuff, and then of course bringing something back to the city where it runs amok.
Yeah, and let's talk about that because
It's the coolest.
let's gloss over the other thing I was going to mention about this movie, which is that it has blackface in it for no reason.
Yes.
Very unfortunate.
Yeah.
It's a very cool movie that's like marred by some just pointless racism. So I guess we're not skipping over it, but anyway, they escape the plateau. All these dinosaurs survived in this isolated environment because nobody could get off of this really tall plateau. But there's a dinosaur that falls off and into some mud.
Right. The Brontosaurus is in the middle of a fight with a carnivore. It gets knocked off a cliff and falls into like a body of water, and so it survives.
Yeah, it survives, and they're able to take it back on the ship back to London, and they do a very King Kong-y like unveiling of the giant creature that they've brought back to the city. In this case, London rather than New York, and then Challenger is giving this presentation, and then he gets a call from Malone, and he's like, "Dude, the dinosaurs escaped." Oh no! Oh shit! What are we gonna do?
Yeah. And then there's a great bit where Challenger yells, "My Brontosaurus has escaped," which is never good news.
All the scientists are like, "Yeah, likely story." Well,
Yeah.
like once again, not bringing the receipts, you know, and very quickly they're proven wrong. As humans are running and fleeing and getting trampled on by a giant dinosaur, walking across Tower Bridge and through London,
just
and
knocking down buildings, crushing stuff,
stepping into
things.
subway stations.
It goes on for a while, and I love every moment. It's so good.
This is far and away my favorite part of the movie. I sent you a meme, the thing from the Onion of the guy going, "Yes, ha ha ha, yes."
Wearing the shirt that says "Sickos."
Yes, because that I literally while I was watching this movie by myself at the theater, and I just screamed "Yes" when the dinosaur got loose.
It's great. I love it.
Yeah. And these shots are done with double exposure. Unlike the other ones where the dinosaurs are like fully opaque and they're just matted off in a different part of the shot. In this, because they wanted the dinosaur in the same shot with the people, the dinosaur is a little translucent, but it is still it's still so cool.
Yeah.
And it's these really high up shots of people running and fleeing from this huge stop motion. Oh, it's great. It's great.
Very King Kong-esque. It's the sort of thing where it's like, oh, that just comes from this directly, pretty much. In the book, they bring back a pterodactyl, which does escape, but causes significantly less mayhem. It's sort of like, it gets out, and then it's like, oh, it escaped. Which I'm glad. I liked the decision to let's make it a brontosaurus and let's have it destroy London.
You gotta punch it up for the movie.
Yeah. And then, instead of being attacked by airplanes, the brontosaurus just jumps into the Thames and escapes and is just loose at the end.
You know what I kind of thought is that maybe this is like a Nessie origin story.
Oh, maybe, yeah.
They brought a brontosaurus to the UK, and then it swims over to Loch Ness.
Maybe. And then we get the ending to the kind of love triangle subplot, where when they get back to London, Gladys has married some rando. So then Ed Malone is free to hook up with Paula, who he's been kind of flirting with the whole movie. They at some point when they're on the plateau, they think they're stuck there forever. And they're like, I guess we're gonna get married now. We're the only young hot people here, so I guess that's what we have to do.
There's a crazy adventurer, 2 old men, and us young hot people.
Yeah. That's the movie. I think I was watching some of the commentary on the Blu-ray on this, which has a lot of cool like behind the scenes facts and stuff. One of which is tying this back into the news segment is that Arthur Conan Doyle knew Percy Fawcett, who disappeared in 1925 in the Amazon, looking for a lost city.
Whoa.
And that like Percy Fawcett might have been someone who kind of inspired the book of this. 'Cause I think the book was written in 1912, and Percy Fawcett had spent a good chunk of the early 1900s, 1910s, looking for this lost city. If you've read the book or seen the movie The Lost City of Zed about Percy Fawcett, that goes into a lot of detail about his whole story. It's very interesting. But it's kind of interesting that this movie came out the same year that Percy Fawcett disappeared. Another thing, like doing research about this movie, I didn't realize that Professor Challenger is in a bunch of other stories. Like, he kept writing stories about Challenger. And all of them have the coolest, pulpiest names possible.
Oh, give me
So, like, the next one after this is called The Poison Belt, which is about the Earth passing through a, like, poison cloud in outer space.
What?
And then after that is The Land of Mist. And then two short stories, which are When the World Screamed and The Disintegration Machine. I mean,
oh my god.
I gotta read all these. These are too good. This movie, like a lot of silent movies, is sort of like the current version of it is like an approximation of what the release was. Like, it's taken from like a bunch of different sources and like trying to like piece together what the original movie was based on like all the pieces that have been found of it.
Mm-hmm.
Which is just something that keeps coming up and is like wild that one, it's been able to have been restored to the degree that it has been. But also just that that's necessary, that it's like there was like an American print that had a bunch of these scenes, and then there was like a different, like a European print that had like different scenes that then had to get like reassembled. It's all, yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it's a shame that silent films have ended up in such a state, but people do really great work reconstructing them.
This movie was written by Marion Fairfax, who was a really prolific screenwriter in the 1920s. There's an Ape-Man in this movie that's feels very sort of
I forgot that we didn't mention the Ape-Man.
Gotta mention the Ape-Man. It feels very kind of like a predecessor to like the Ape People in 2001.
Yeah.
But with a more sort of sinister look.
Yeah, he's definitely trying to definitely trying to kill and eat these adventurers.
Yes. But there's like a guy in the sort of Ape-Man costume and makeup, and then there's just an actual chimpanzee that he hangs out with, which is kind of funny.
There's a point where they like specifically go like, "Is that guy some kind of missing link or something?"
Yeah. What is this guy, missing link? And then there's a bit where they're like, they shoot at him, and he gets injured, and there's kind of a brief scene where you see him kind of like nursing himself back to health, and it's like, oh, we have a scene of pathos for the Ape-Man.
Which we need.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't movies as a thing pathos for the Ape-Man?
Largely, yes. Something that comes up a lot in film, surprisingly.
They're empathy machines.
Yeah.
And we as Ape-Men operate.
Another thing that I guess is sort of like news, not really news, but a thing that I've been noticing a lot in a lot of film, like 1920s movies, is old lenses, old like portrait lenses in particular, have this like kind of swirly effect around the edges, where the bokeh, the out of focus shapes, will sort of create this kind of circular distortion to it, which is really, I think, looks really cool. And so in researching that, I ended up going on eBay and buying a new lens for my camera that has that sort of like look to it.
I don't know what you're talking about. You'll have to send me a picture.
Yeah, I noticed it a lot in The Lost World, so I can probably get a screen cap showing that, and then maybe I've been trying to like play with this lens and try to get it to like look similar because it's a cool effect.
Look at you, film production guy, who's just like, an interesting lens. I will buy it.
Well, it's also I found out that so the lens I bought is an old Soviet lens from like the 70s, and they made so many of them that you can buy them on eBay now for like $50, which for a camera lens is nothing.
Wow, nice.
So they make other ones that are sort of like a bit more, newer and sort of like have all more modern features, things like that, but they're more money. But it was like, well, for that price, I might as well.
I don't notice lenses very much because I'm just not like attuned to it. But one thing that I do notice is we had a Shaw Brothers movie on just like the TVs at work the other day, and it seems like Shaw Brothers use these just really extreme anamorphic lenses. So anything that's near the edge of the frame is like so distorted. It almost like looks like the edge of a fisheye, which I don't know what they were doing, because like there are lots of anamorphic movies that don't have that much distortion, or it's like very light. But like with specifically like 70s and 80s like CinemaScope kung fu movies, like you turn into like a funhouse mirror when you get to the edge of the screen.
There was a Soderbergh movie that came out a couple years ago, No Sudden Move, that used, I think, like vintage 70s anamorphic lenses that have that same like super wild distortion on the edges. That is like, I don't know. I love anamorphic lenses, like the aesthetic of them and the ways that they kind of distort things, and yet that's like too much for me. That's like I draw the line there. That's just too weird looking. But yeah, I don't know. It's something that I notice more and more is like lens quirks.
In these movies or just in general?
Just in general. But yeah, in these movies, that was something I had noticed more and more of is this sort of like circular out of focus distortion. So I think it's very distinctive, and it's something that I don't see a lot of in movies now, because it is like a defect. Like it comes from just really old lenses that haven't like, don't account for that distortion. That will, like, newer lenses will make it look like your eye sees. But I don't know. I like that stuff. I think it gives it character. And on that note. Anything else to say?
No. Podcast over.
Great. Just cut it there.
What was your favorite movie of this episode?
I mean, I think... people will yell at me for this. I think, like, the best movie we watched was Potemkin, but, like, my favorite has got to be Lost World. Like, Lost World has a lot of things that count against it. I mean, I think its plot stuff is kind of generic and not super interesting. It's like, all right, they go to a place and there's a love triangle and whatever. The unfortunate 1920s blackface is shitty, and I think does sort of like knock a star off this movie in terms of like its quality, or just watchability, I guess.
Yeah, harder to just put it on.
Yeah,
I actually was just putting it on the background yesterday, and I was like, ugh.
Yeah, it's like it might prevent this movie from going on the put it on in the background at the party playlist, unfortunately, because like if I could find like just the dinosaur scenes, maybe throw those in there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think in terms of my overall just sort of like reaction to it, I think I'm gonna go with Lost World, because it feels it's so on brand with its pulpy adventure shit.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm glad you picked that, because Battleship Potemkin blew my dang mind.
Yeah.
And I think
it's kind of the obvious choice of the best movie of this year.
Oh, thanks. That's very
No, I'm not saying that as a put down, but it's like it's like also kind of my favorite movie from this year. It's just I wanted I wanted to pick Lost World to give it so we each pick something different.
Yeah, that's always good.
Yeah.
I feel like Battleship Potemkin may be the like best movie that we have seen so far. At least in terms of quality.
It's up there. Yeah.
That'll about do it for this episode. Once again, check us out on social medias and YouTubes and whatnot. If you're trying to keep up to date with us, we're gonna move on to 1926 next episode because that's how this works. We've shifted our release over a week because I'm moving and just stuff's hard right now.
Yeah.
But I think we'll probably get back on the once every 2 week thing, but just shift it over 1 week. Thanks everybody for listening and for watching
Indeed.
on YouTube. Thanks for your comments and your subscriptions. And that's the podcast stuff.
Yeah.
Glenn, that's it for this episode. See you next year.
See you next year.